Cesar Hernandez, a fugitive in Mexico and California, is now in the custody of Mexican authorities. This video from the Baja California State Attorney General. Hernandez is accused of killing Mexican State Police Commander Abigail Esparza, part of an elite task force that hunts U.S. fugitives in Mexico.
The state security department says several armed men opened fire at the officers who were on the way to a home to enforce a judicial order. Vehicles were left burning in the middle of the highway after the shooting. Large placards signed by a notorious drug gang.
A top Mexican police comandante has just been brutally executed in broad daylight, ambushed, shot in the head, and left slumped behind the wheel of his truck on a public road in Culiacan. Just a few hours earlier, another senior officer had also been executed in the exact same way. And now, La Chapiza, the armed wing of El Chapo's sons, is taking credit with chilling footage circulating the internet, showing exactly what happens to cops who stand in their way. So, now everyone's asking the same thing. What did these officers do to end up on the cartel's hit list? And is this the beginning of another brutal purge, like the one the Sinaloa cartel carried out back in 2017? At around 9 p.m. on July 16, 2025, Commander Ricardo Eleno Sanchez Quintero, better known to many as Commander Richard, was driving through the streets of Culiacan in his red Ford Ranger. He wasn't on patrol that night. He wasn't even in uniform. It was his day off. But according to this Al Jazeera report, off-duty cops are mostly targeted, and here's why.
More have died here than anywhere else in Mexico so far this year. And the majority are killed when they're off duty. That's because, as elsewhere in the country, they have to hand in their guns when they finish their shifts. High-level officials worry that they'll use their weapons illegally themselves if left armed. But it's then that they're easy prey for criminals.
As he drove down Boulevard Manuel Cloutier, one of the busiest streets in Culiacan, he noticed a vehicle behind him. The way it mirrored his turns and followed closely made it clear this wasn't a coincidence. Richard had been in the game long enough to know when something was off. Someone was following him, and he had a pretty good idea who it was. Without hesitation, he picked up speed, hoping to lose them before they got close enough to strike. He made a quick turn onto Avenida Mexico 68, then headed uphill toward Cerro de las Cumbres, trying to reach a familiar intersection near a shopping plaza. That stretch of road offered some visibility and maybe even a chance to get help if he made it in time, but he never got that far before they cornered him. And according to this report from Milenio, what followed was a brutal execution.
There they heard the loud gunshots that were reported at that point around 9 p.m. There were even some videos circulating on social media where the magnitude of these loud detonations with large caliber weapons could be appreciated, and it was later learned that the victim had been a municipal police officer.
When police arrived at the scene minutes later, they found the red Ford Ranger sitting in the middle of the road. The engine was still running. The headlights were on. All 4 tires had been shredded. It looked like the truck had been forced to a stop before it could make that final turn. Inside, in the driver's seat, was Commander Richard's body, slumped behind the wheel. He had been shot repeatedly, and many of the rounds were aimed directly at his head. From everything at the scene, it was clear this had been a planned and deliberate execution. Commander Richard had spent over 11 years with the Culiacan Municipal Police. He led the motorcycle unit based out of Parque 87, and while many officers in the city had quietly aligned themselves with one cartel faction or another, Richard was known as a difficult man to control, especially by cartel operators hoping to turn police forces into an extension of their own command. According to reports, Commander Richard had been a problem for La Chapiza, the brutal wing of the Sinaloa cartel loyal to El Chapo's sons, and in Culiacan, being a problem for La Chapiza, or to any cartel at all, comes with deadly consequences. Just a few weeks before, local officers were caught on video guarding a wounded cartel boss, while also executing the injured hitmen from La Mayiza, the faction loyal to El Mayo. That incident should have sparked a scandal, but the suspects were released without consequence. No charges were filed, either because it was widely suspected that the mayor himself had intervened to dismiss the case. But Richard wasn't part of that cover-up. He wasn't among the officers who looked the other way in the face of corruption, and for that reason, he stood out, exactly exactly the way the hitmen needed him to. Now, the shocking thing is, Richard's murder was not an isolated incident. It was the second targeted killing of a senior police commander in Culiacan in less than 24 hours. Just one day before Commander Richard was ambushed and killed, another high-ranking officer was gunned down, this time in broad daylight. On July 15, 2025, Commander David Cristobal Barraza Sainz, better known as Commander Nitro, was driving with his wife along Pedro Infante Boulevard, one of the busiest roads in Culiacan. It was just after 1:30 p.m. when a group of armed men opened fire on his vehicle. Nitro was in an armored Volkswagen Tiguan, which should have offered some protection, but the gunmen knew exactly how to take him out. The attackers unloaded a barrage of bullets into the SUV, piercing through the windows and doors. By the time the car veered off the road and rolled onto the median, Nitro was already slumped over the steering wheel. His wife, who was in the passenger seat, survived, but was badly injured. The shooters didn't stop until they were absolutely sure he was dead. Then, they disappeared without a trace. The attack happened just a short distance from the Sinaloa State Education Ministry, in a heavily monitored and high-traffic part of the city, yet no arrests were made. Even though military units, forensic teams, and state police arrived quickly, the people behind the ambush were long gone by the time backup showed up. The entire hit was planned and carried out with such precision, there was no doubt. This was a targeted assassination, ordered by people with serious resources, inside information, and a clear motive. What made Nitro's murder even more disturbing was the fact that he had seen it coming. Months earlier, he had submitted a formal request to leave the force. That request was still pending at the time of his death. According to people close to him, the threats against him had started building up since December 2024. He had grown increasingly concerned about his safety, especially as violence across the state began to spike, but he stayed on the job, at least officially, until the day he died. Local investigators and media reports immediately connected the attack to the ongoing civil war inside the Sinaloa cartel. As you guys already know, after the arrests of Joaquin Guzman Lopez, one of El Chapo's sons, and Ismael El Mayo Zambada in the United States in July 2024, the cartel fractured into two rival factions: Los Chapitos, led by El Chapo's remaining sons, and La Mayiza, still loyal to El Mayo. The power struggle that followed triggered an explosion of violence across Sinaloa, and law enforcement quickly became one of the main targets. Commanders like Nitro found themselves in impossible situations. If they stood up to the cartel, they became enemies. If they were seen as cooperating with one side over the other, they became threats. Even trying to stay neutral was no guarantee of safety. Like Commander Richard, Nitro had led operations against cartel groups in the past. He had a reputation for being tough and uncompromising. That alone would have been enough to put a target on his back. But in this case, the way he was killed suggested something more. Some in Culiacan believed that he was perceived as being closer to one faction than the other, and that's why they decided it was safer to eliminate him. In the hours after Nitro's murder, panic quietly spread through Culiacan's police ranks. Officers who had worked with him began questioning their own safety. Some started changing their routines, others stayed home entirely. The murder created an atmosphere of fear that affected every uniformed officer in the city, and that fear only deepened the next night when Commander Richard was taken out in a similarly brutal way. Two senior commanders executed within 36 hours of each other, both in Culiacan, both tracked, targeted, and killed in public. But this is really nothing new. The kind of violence that is tearing through Culiacan in 2025 isn't new. In fact, it is following a pattern that many officers in Sinaloa still remember all too well. You see, back in 2017, the city went through something eerily similar, another series of targeted executions of law enforcement officers. Between March and June of that year, at least 16 municipal police officers were assassinated in what many believe was a calculated purge ordered by Los Chapitos. Mind you, this wasn't even during an inter-cartel war. It happened shortly after El Chapo was extradited to the United States in January 2017. His sons were scrambling to secure power and loyalty, and one of their first moves was eliminating anyone who might stand in their way. The strategy was brutal and deliberate. Officers were ambushed while on patrol, shot at close range, while sitting in traffic, and in several cases, gunned down at their own homes in front of their families. The cartel wasn't hiding its intentions. The killings were out in the open, and they weren't random. The victims were chosen specifically for their perceived loyalty to rival factions, their cooperation with federal authorities, or their role in disrupting cartel operations. In some neighborhoods, families woke up to gunfire and sirens more than once in a single week. Soon, officers started skipping shifts, patrols were cut in half, and across the city, fear took over. Everyone knew what was happening, but there was nothing they could do about it. By the time federal officials acknowledged what was going on, the damage had already been done. The municipal police force had been gutted. Those who survived either stayed quiet or left. Then it became very clear that the Chapitos were in charge now, and they weren't just going after enemies, they were removing the very idea of resistance. That wave of killings changed how law enforcement operated in Culiacan. Officers stopped trusting each other. Some even began working directly with cartels to survive. Others stayed in uniform but avoided confrontation, and the cartels, now with fewer obstacles in their way, tightened their grip on the city. That legacy didn't fade, it remained just beneath the surface. And when the arrests of Joaquin Guzman Lopez and El Mayo Zambada triggered a fresh civil war in 2024, it didn't take long for that same purge strategy to resurface. Now in 2025, it's playing out again, and the similarities are hard to ignore. According to data compiled by Causa and Común, at least 125 police officers were killed across Mexico between January and April 2025 alone. Now, you know the figure is likely higher than that, because in some cases, officers just disappear without a trace. These news reports should give you an idea just how bad this situation is.
To Mexico, where gunmen have killed at least 13 police officers in an ambush in the western part of the country, which is about 360 kilometers from the capital city of Mexico City. They also left 3 others wounded.
Now, social media images show police vehicles riddled with bullets and bodies alongside a road in the state of Mexico, which borders the capital of Mexico City. It's one of the most violent regions in the country. In fact, last year throughout Mexico, more than 500 police officers were murdered.
2 days of terror have left dozens dead in southwestern Mexico. On Monday, 14 police officers were killed in the state of Michoacan. The officers were ambushed by gunmen.
This case, reported by Al Jazeera, is particularly heartbreaking.
Nayeli's boyfriend, a police officer like her, was killed too, in an ambush. This is the shirt he was wearing. She was deeply traumatized. So was her family. Now she's in an office role.
I had a situation with my son. He said to me, "I'm frightened when you go out to work because I don't know if you're coming back." And that parts your soul in two, because it's true. We don't know if we're coming back.
These targeted killings are not just acts of revenge or personal vendettas. They are part of a larger blueprint that had already worked once before. Los Chapitos had used it in 2017 to weaken rival control and take over local law enforcement. And now, with La Maiza pushing back harder than ever, they've gone back to the same tactic, removing commanders, creating chaos, and re-establishing dominance. Please share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth videos like this. Meanwhile, click on any of the cards on your screen right now to watch more of our videos.